Hello, everyone, and welcome to another American Diabetes Association Be a Friend Friday chat. My name is Marley, and today I will be speaking with Reneé. She is an actor, author, host, mom, and she's also living with type 1 diabetes. We'll be speaking with her today to discuss her journey with diabetes and how her diagnosis inspired her to create her platform, Diabettie. Thank you for joining me, Reneé.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Marley. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So I'd love to hear a little bit of background on you, kind of like where you grew up and when you were diagnosed with type 1.
Certainly. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. I now live in Atlanta, Georgia. And the one thing about my background that really has helped me with my late onset type 1 diabetes diagnosis is that I worked in diabetes for about 7 years as a medical device rep as well as a pharmaceutical rep. And I learned the symptoms and signs of diabetes and even had to read the book Think Like a Pancreas.
Wow. So you knew all of the things to look out for like prior to your diagnosis.
Certainly, but it still took some time before it registered.
Sure. Do you remember like the events leading up to that, like your symptoms and like how that all came about?
Certainly. So, 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with late onset type 1 diabetes. But before that, probably even a year before that, I had been to my primary care doctor more than once. I had been to an allergist. I had been to my dentist. So, I had this weird taste in my mouth. I went to the dentist. The dentist told me that generally that's from people not brushing their teeth. I then went to an allergist and said, I am putting on 5 pounds overnight. Do I have food allergies? What could it be? And he said, there's no physical possible way that could happen that you could put on 5 pounds and lose it the next day. I went to my primary care doctor and they tested me for a variety of other things, but not for type 1 diabetes. So it wasn't until during COVID I had a doctor's appointment online where you could actually see your previous stats on, they had done a blood glucose. It wasn't fasting, but I thought that number is high. I know that that number is high. And so I decided to go ahead and make an appointment with my primary care doctor to get a physical, but I was really starting to feel ill at this time. And when I mean ill, I always have drank a lot of water and unsweet tea, but now it had doubled and tripled. I couldn't get off the couch. I was just exhausted. And I went in for my physical, came back, everything was fine except my fasting blood sugar was high. A doctor says, hey, why don't you come in and get your A1C done? And I told him about me seeing that it was high at another doctor's office. And I said, is there any possible way that I could have type 1 diabetes? And he said, no. He said, no, we'd be looking for type 2 diabetes. And, luckily with all of this training that I had, I knew something didn't add up. So when I went in for my A1C, the doctor did not come back. It was only the nurse to draw my labs. And I said, is there any way that I could speak to the doctor just for a quick second? And the doctor comes back and I said, listen, I know I'm not a physician, but we just did a physical on me and I don't have any other comorbidities that generally go with type 2 diabetes. I don't have high cholesterol, high lipids. I'm not overweight. Could we do a C-peptide test on me? And he said, you know what? That makes sense. Let's do it. And it came back, and with all my other labs, I do have late onset type 1 diabetes. And here's the thing. Generally, people that are adults are misdiagnosed for a year and a half as a type 2 when they are if they are a type 1. That is the general kind of consensus, which is pretty shocking. And that's the reason why I'm so transparent about my story.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that you had so much background knowledge and were able to kind of lead your doctors in that direction, because a lot of people wouldn't even know what the symptoms were, let alone to have a C-peptide test or to push for that and to push for an A1C and know something's off, even though your labs are coming back well. And so it's really amazing that you're able to kind of figure that out for yourself when you're kind of coming up against brick wall after brick wall with these different doctor's appointments.
And, to go back to those doctor's appointments, the taste in my mouth at the dentist, that was high blood sugar. It can give you a taste in your mouth. The putting on weight up and down, that's a sign of undiagnosed type 1 diabetes or just diabetes in general. And all of these other things that I had were all symptoms and signs of diabetes, but I didn't look like somebody that they generally diagnose for type 1 diabetes. And I am so thankful with my previous training. I never tried to specifically get into diabetes. I didn't have diabetes at that time. And I'm so thankful for that, that I don't think that I would go through all of that training, do all of that for 7 different years. I sold both a type 1 medication, a type 2 medication, and a continuous glucose monitor. And I just feel that if I went through all of that, and now I have type 1 diabetes, that I should be transparent and talk about it, because it is what helped me potentially stay out of DKA, which can be deadly for type 1, and a lot of times how they are diagnosed, and also not going through years of being misdiagnosed. So with that, I just want to make sure that I do my part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, bringing awareness to a late type 1 diagnosis is so important, because yeah, it's much rarer than a type 1 in children. But it's so important for us to remember that it can happen to anyone at any age. And so to be aware of these signs and symptoms is extra important for a lot of people.
And I don't blame any of these physicians, because I know that it is rare. So that's why, I still go see my same primary care doctor that I did beforehand, because they were open to testing me for that. And they did listen to me, which I know
Yeah.
sometimes, especially for women, they don't feel heard when they're with their physician.
Yeah, absolutely. Having doctors who will listen and like trust your instinct and be like, yes, of course, I will run these tests for you. If anything, it'll rule something out. And that's helpful knowledge as well.
Certainly.
Yeah. So when you were diagnosed, did you know anyone else with type 1 at that time?
I did. I actually knew a couple people with type 1, and one of them didn't think there was any way that I could have late onset. And additionally, I remember at the time I called my boss at the time, and I said, "Listen, I'm going to have to take a couple days off. I'm not well. They think that I have type 1 diabetes." And he said, "Well, there's no possible way." And I said, "Pardon me?" He said, "There's no possible way you can have type 1 diabetes. You wouldn't be able to move right now. You wouldn't be okay." And I think that's the thing, is people don't understand that there's a honeymoon phase a lot of times associated with type 1 diabetes. So you can be without insulin and still be able to physically move and still go along with your day, because your pancreas is kind of slowly giving out, if you will, or puttering out. But back to your question, I'm sorry. I did luckily know a couple people with type 1. And I know that that is such a big thing for especially people that don't know other type 1s, to meet people that also have it, because somebody gets you and somebody understands you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was diagnosed at 7, and it took many years for me to meet someone else who had type 1. And so that community support is so important, especially in like the early days.
Agree, when it feels so, overwhelming and in every possible way. May I ask, how long was it before you met somebody that also had type 1?
Oh, I was probably well into middle school, high school, but so I was diagnosed at 7, so probably like early teens, 12, 13.
Oh, wow.
I had a couple in my class in like middle school and high school who also had type 1. But at that time, I really didn't want to like discuss it that much. So even then, even though they were there and like had the same diagnosis as me, it wasn't super common for me to talk about it. And I kind of wish like I could go back and tell myself like, why didn't you talk to them about their experiences and your experiences? But
You were a kid. And I think the other thing that's great about the current time that we're living in is that continuous glucose monitors, people that have type 1 as well as type 2 or another form of diabetes, have them. So many people are wearing CGMs that it's not weird now to wear a medical device, and these commercials, and people see it. And I think that that's one thing that's really helped people not feel fearful of talking about it or showing or feeling that they're different. I think those things are really helping.
Yeah, absolutely. They really do. And the stigma has kind of broken down slightly because of that, the ability to kind of show that tech, and people are a little more willing to show it and talk about it.
Agree.
And so after you were diagnosed, what were kind of your initial thoughts? Like, you never expected this to happen, or you're happy that you figured it out finally, and hopefully you can start feeling a little better. What were some of those things going through your head?
I think the biggest thing that I had learned in my previous training was that you don't necessarily have time to cope with it. You have to take care of it first. And that's one of the things that I think leads to diabetes distress so much with people with type 1, is that you don't have downtime. It is a constant 24/7. And that's what I think the misunderstanding about what type 1 is. And I believe there's the NIH came out with a study that said the typical person with type 1 diabetes makes 180 medical decisions a day. So it was probably some time before I really could sit down with it. And also, I wasn't feeling like myself. I felt really horrible. And it was within the first 24 hours of taking insulin that, oh my gosh, I didn't feel so absolutely horrible. And that feeling alone was enough to help me continue to figure this thing out because I felt so good. And, it had come to the point where I couldn't even work out anymore. And now I was back in the gym. So I was just feeling better. And that helped me continue with it. And then I think there's still times that I go through like, oh my gosh, I have diabetes. And even sometimes saying it out loud still feels weird. Does that go away? I'll ask you, does that go away at some point?
Um, it depends. I think it depends on who I'm talking to and like how much they understand about this like this disease and diagnosis. Because a lot of times I will say it and then you'll either get like the blank expression of like what's the difference between type 1 and type 2 and all of that, or you'll get the, oh, I actually know this person who has it, so I understand it very well, and like blah blah blah. So it kind of gets a little easier like the longer you go, but yeah, a lot of times it's kind of circumstantial on how much everyone else understands it and how
And
much you have to talk about it.
I totally get what you're saying. And I think the one thing that's been something I wasn't prepared for was the unsolicited advice that comes with having diabetes in general, whether you have type 1, type 2, or another form, is that people tend to think that they can say whatever they want to, or a lot of people do, about what you're eating or what you're doing or what you shouldn't do. And that for me was kind of shocking, to say the least. And I know that also children deal with that. I mean, you probably had to deal with that. And that's one of the things that I talk about on my Diabettie platform, because I feel like that's something people sometimes that don't have diabetes think it's okay to say. They think they're doing you a favor, but it's not. And it's a lot to deal with. So to deal with other people trying to tell you that people that don't understand diabetes, don't understand the difference between type 1 and type 2. And even if you have type 2, somebody doesn't need to constantly hear, can you eat that? I was talking to someone the other day, and they spoke about how that can continue this cycle of stress, then that can make your blood sugar numbers continue to stay high because those people are saying things like that to you, and you can internalize that. And then that stress, is associated with your blood sugar.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm someone who takes my management pretty seriously and like obviously manages it all day, every day. And so to have the extra, like you have the thoughts already in your head all day, and then to have an outside source saying the exact same things to you of like, okay, what are you eating now? What insulin do you have to take now? Are you doing this correctly? Should you be doing this? All of those things are constantly going through your head. So it's hard.
And I think one of the biggest things that someone said to me that shocked me was, um, I'm just going to say it. They said, well, if you wouldn't have gotten fat, you wouldn't need insulin. And it took me back a bit, because here's the thing. Number one, I'm not overweight, but even if I was, that's not appropriate in any way, shape, or form. Whether someone has type 1 or type 2 diabetes, you should never say something like that.
No.
And to also make the assumption like that, like, to me, that was so hurtful. And then you think about young children like yourself, people having to hear these thoughts. And I think that I try to, when people now make comments like that to me, I try to be better prepared to answer back, and instead of being defensive or being hurt by it, to take a moment and try to have it be a more teachable moment. But you should never say that to anybody,
Right. No, that is not appropriate to say to anyone across the board. And those kind of things just like stick with you, whether they're true or not, they just stick with you forever. And so, yeah, that's a really hard thing, especially like newly diagnosed. That's such a hard comment to receive. And then, yeah, not even know what to do with that. And like trying to educate them is always the best course of action. That's always my first go-to. And saying something like, well, actually, it's an autoimmune disease, and here's how they differ, and here's some of the factors that may go into it. Yeah, because you'll get things like that probably forever, in my experience, at least.
Thank you for pre-warning me.
Yep, no problem. Didn't want to freak out, but it may still happen going forward. But so what led you now to your platform, Diabettie? Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about and kind of what you do with it?
Certainly. So I have noticed one of the biggest things that people with type 1 talk to me about is the information that they do not receive about type 1 diabetes. So for example, in the state of Georgia, if you are a child 18 and under and you have type 1 diabetes, your parents as well as you go through a certain amount of training. Now,
Mhm.
when you are 18 plus, that's not the case. You don't really get much training, if you will. I was kind of given insulin and it was like, well, hey, maybe you'll figure it out kind of thing. And my doctor is fantastic and they still help me with all of these things that I need, but there wasn't this full-blown training in the sense that you deal with so much insulin per day. It's very easy to potentially become fatal. You can accidentally give
Mhm.
yourself too much. You can, there's all these other factors. It's also very hard for a physician's office to be able to give you that time nowadays. They don't have that amount of time. And so
Mhm.
what I've noticed is that especially people that were older, that were late onset, were having trouble getting any information. And then also other people just wanted to be seen and be heard. So the two things that I focus on are inspiration and information, because I
Mhm.
want people to know that they are heard, they are seen, and it is okay. And you're going to be okay. Additionally, I go through, like, for example, why I sit right here, I've got my blood sugar going. I've got a thing of juice, and to talk about
Mhm.
what the real things are that I'm going through living with type 1 diabetes and how you can do it and still do what you love. And yeah, not everything's great all the time. And so those are two of the things that I really focus on: inspiration and information.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are so important because it can get very hard to remember that, like, you're doing everything you can, and some days just aren't going to be as good as others, and it's hard to accept that sometimes you just aren't going to be able to manage it as well for a myriad of different factors. But knowing that you will get it down, you will figure out better ways, you will understand it, and you'll hear other people's stories, and it'll inspire you to try something new or look at it differently. And having platforms like yours is so helpful in that, like, response.
Thank you. And I think the other thing that I'm learning also is that women in general with type 1 diabetes are
Mhm.
not getting a lot of talks about hormonal factors that can
Mhm.
contribute to your changes in
Uh-huh.
blood sugar and giving you extremely high blood sugar. And and I also get that because the amount of endocrinologists generally are male. And, it's something that a lot of times people haven't even been spoken to about. So just to open up conversations, even, I'm not a physician. When I say information, I'm not saying anything that I'm coming up with or anything like that. I'm just sharing, topics, things that you see in studies,
Mhm.
and talking about some of these things that maybe weren't spoken to people about in an office. And I know there's a variety of reasons for that. Time is such a hard thing, as well as with diabetes. You can't just have one day of training and get it. Heck, I'm on year 2 and I'm still learning.
Yeah, I'm on year 21 and I'm still learning every day. So I think that's a lifelong experience to always be learning, always be, open to new ideas and new things. And it's so important to have inspiration and those things to back you up in that. And it's really great when you can find, like, physicians that want to help you succeed as much as possible. I'm always such a big advocate of people finding, like, their primary cares, their endocrinologists, whoever they have that just want to help them succeed and not push different ideas onto them.
I agree with you. I was very fortunate from my previous career that I knew who was one of the best doctors, not only in the state, but in the United States. And just to circle back, some of the the hard things that I had to do to find out that I had type 1 diabetes, and I have the community that I have because I worked in diabetes, and I know how insurance works, and I know how
Mhm.
different tests work. And it still was so hard for me to push to get my diagnosis, to get it took over 6 months for me to get my insulin pump covered. All of these things that I had to go through that shouldn't be that hard. And I think about like the people that don't have that previous knowledge. And I only have that because I worked in it. And
Mhm.
so I just want to make sure I circle back around and say that as well, because those are attributing factors that go with diabetes that sometimes people that don't have it don't understand those extra things, layers, just to get your medication, um,
Mhm.
and how to go about that.
Yeah. I mean, the insurance and just the mental toll of that side, that's not even part of the management process that you do all day. It's very layered and very dense stuff to try and get through just
So
to
true.
survive.
Just to live.
Yeah, just to be
Just
alive.
to live.
That's it. That's all we're trying to do here.
Exactly.
What has been some of your biggest goals with this platform? Like, I know you mentioned like education and inspiration, but is there like specifically a target audience you're trying to get to, or are there just overall goals that you have in mind with where you want to go?
One of my biggest goals is the symptoms and signs of diabetes
Mhm.
and getting that out. And my
Mhm.
second one is for people to ask for testing if they think they could potentially have diabetes, to encourage people to go to their doctor and that it doesn't hurt. One of the things that I have done repeatedly is put on continuous glucose monitors as well as my insulin pump pod on camera. And I showed the first time I did it, the first time I took it off, and how I'm really feeling. And I have a lot of people that say that, I watched your video and put on my continuous glucose monitor at the same time as you. And those kind of things make me
Mhm.
continue to be very transparent about what it's like, and so that people know to not be scared about it. One of my biggest videos was taking off my Freestyle Libre continuous glucose monitor.
Mhm.
And I couldn't get over it because people that repeatedly in the comments, it was, does that hurt? I would have thought it was putting it on, but it was taking it off that seemed to be
Mm.
a bigger thing. And to be able to tell people my experience, again, I'm not a physician, but to show
Right.
my experience, to talk about it, to show and tell.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that if continued high blood glucose can lead to a myriad of things, including losing your vision, amputations of your feet, or all these other things. So that if you can get ahead of it, how you can live a much better life. And I think that those things in general are what I am trying to do on my Diabettie platform.
Yeah. Well, and it's so great that you're willing to share those with everyone because it can be a very isolating experience. If you're the only one in your family, in your support system that is dealing with this, they don't, as much as they want to understand and support you and help you and can in many ways, they're not the ones who are going to be putting on these CGMs with them or the pumps or taking multiple daily injections. So their support goes so far, but their experience can never really get there. And so
Certainly.
having someone with that firsthand experience and show them like with them how this works for you is amazing and
Oh,
it's so
thank you.
invaluable.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, of course. And I mean, I always think back to when I was 7 years old and like I would have loved to have been able to watch videos like this because at 7, it's very hard to wrap your head around all of this. My mom was huge and influential in like my management then and has always been like my biggest supporter. And so even for her to have been able to see something like this would have been probably life-changing because she could see it firsthand and like how best to support my management.
And I know even myself as a middle-aged woman, I still love to go to events and meet other type ones, no matter what age they are. So I know
Mhm.
that's important for everyone. And you talked about parents. And one of the things that I've also tried to do is some videos on what I hear young people say that they don't like,
Mm.
that their parents are trying to be helpful and supportive. And no parent is perfect. I'm a parent. I am not perfect. That
Mhm.
some things that can help them. For example, instead of saying good numbers and bad numbers, in range and out of range, and also expectations that I remember I spoke to a doctor before, and they talked about their parent, them as parents wanting their kids to be like a straight A student. They also want them to get straight A's in diabetes, and that's not going to happen. You're not going to be 100% in range.
No.
That's not a doable thing. And so to be able to chat with people online all over the world
Mm-hmm.
has been wonderful. I have learned just as much from other people, and it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, and to put that like stress of trying to be 100% perfect all the time is so hard on yourself. Like there's a lot of talk about diabetes burnout, and I think that is a big contributor to that. Just trying to be perfect all the time and not meeting those goals or not meeting them as well as you hoped or wanted to can be really hard to get through.
I agree. And I think there's also some things online that can be helpful to some people and hurtful to others. For
Mm-hmm.
example, there's a lot of people that like to say type 1 diabetes is my superpower. They like that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not going to work for everybody. That doesn't work for me. I'd much rather not have it. It doesn't make me all of these things. It puts a lot of stress on me, quite
Mm-hmm.
frankly. And I don't have a problem saying that, but that's for me. Other people, that helps them. And so I think it's great that we have such a variety of different people online sharing their personal stories, because someone will connect with one person versus another. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that people with diabetes just want to do, is connect with others, to be seen, to be heard. And sometimes it's, like, for example, if you've ever been to a therapist, it's like just being seen and being heard. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes that's what it's like to see other people with diabetes and how they manage it. It's like, oh, I'm seen and I'm heard. I get this same feeling when I see other people, online or in person. If I see a diabetic in public, even my husband is like, I know you're going to go say hi. Yes, I am.
You are correct. I will be doing that. Thank you. Yeah, it's the people that I've talked to, especially in my adult life, I find that I have such a like instant connection with, because even if like our management styles are very different, or our, time of diagnosis or how it all happened is very different, there's still, for whatever reason, that like instant bond of you understand what we go through every single day, and not everyone does understand that. So like hearing what you have to say and understanding my version of it is amazing, and not something people get all the time.
I totally understand. It's like someone that knows your vulnerability and theirs as
Mhm.
well.
Yes, and like you said, it is a huge stress. It's a big stress of mine every day, and so yeah, calling it a superpower, not calling it a superpower, it's kind of whatever helps you deal with it day to day. I'm
Agree completely.
Yeah, you go for it. That is 100% what you should be doing. What's one of the most important things you've learned about diabetes, or your type 1 specifically, in the last few years?
For me specifically, it is kind of twofold. Number one, I gave up drinking alcohol completely.
Mm,
It has given me, I get rebound hypoglycemia the next day, and it makes life absolutely miserable. And this can happen from one or two drinks. So
mhm,
I have learned that it has made my management even better, not having a glass of wine with dinner. The other thing that I have learned is that I have got to plan. And I'm somebody, I do improvisation. I love to live on the seat of my pants, as well as be prepared. But with type 1, you got to take that off the table. You have to be prepared. I'm always going to be someone that carries a big bag because I need all my supplies.
yep,
Anytime I've ever traveled without it, what happens? I need all of that. So, always making sure I'm prepared. But the things that I have done to help me with that is I've got like an on the go bag that if I'm going to go on vacation, or if I'm just leaving the house for a day, that I have and I'm ready to go. So it helps me get back to the person that I feel like, before diagnosis, that I can still kind of fly by the seat of my pants because I'm prepared. And those are probably the two biggest changes that I've made that have really, really helped me stay in much better accuracy.
yeah, and yeah, being prepared is so important. Like anytime I go outside of my routine, I really have to think about it even harder. Of like, okay, what am I doing today? What things can I take in advance to avoid any issues? And yeah, it's something I think you kind of have to learn as you go, of like how best to manage and plan and look ahead without burning yourself out.
And I think one of the hardest things for me still is working out and
Hmm.
not going low,
Mm-hmm.
because there are so many factors with that. I've read a wonderful book by Ginger Vieira that talks about type 1 diabetes and working out. And What are some great ways to do that without having insulin on board? And, a lot of times I play pickleball. A lot of times people want to play pickleball at 6 to 8 or 8 to 10 p.m. That's a very hard time for a person with type 1 diabetes to work out.
Yep.
And how to prepare if I'm going to play later. These are things that like I can't get around, because anytime I've ever even attempted to do that, and try to eat 3 hours beforehand, and all these factors that go into just working out is overwhelming. But
Yeah.
I've learned how to do it. It took some time, and I can finally do all of these things that I love, which makes me want to continue to stay prepared.
Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree. And it's kind of back to your suggestion of wanting to live by the seat of your pants. Like, I also would love to do that, but only to a certain extent, because as you mentioned, with like working out, even going for like a walk after dinner, that will drastically change what I should take for my insulin before dinner or whatever it is. And that's a really hard hurdle to get over, especially when you're around people that may not be thinking in that way. And you're like, well, if you had told me that we were going to go play pickleball after dinner, or we were going to go for a walk or a hike or whatever you wanted to do, I wouldn't have taken this amount of insulin. I would have done this. And now I'm really going to have to look at my CGM and watch how I'm feeling and watch what I'm doing in these next few hours because of it. And yeah, it's
Marley, you get me. This is why there's such a bond when a type 1 meets another type 1,
Yeah.
or when the food comes out at the table and everybody orders appetizers and you're like, well, I've taken my bolus. I'm going to have to wait 10 minutes. Or when people want to share food and you're like, no, 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 I gotta, there's just certain things that it's so nice to talk to another type 1 about, because they just get you.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, even like the appetizers and dinner, like I love just relaxing and having a long dinner, but I'm also like, I'm only going to eat for a certain amount of time though. Like we can't keep doing like multiple courses, because I'm just going to have to like keep doing insulin, and that's just going to get really dicey really quick.
I totally agree with you. Had I known how much math is involved in type 1, I would have continued with higher level math courses, because my goodness, the amount of math that needs to be done when you eat is pretty
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So just to wrap up, is there any sort of like advice you would give to someone just being newly diagnosed with type 1 that you maybe would have loved to have had when you were diagnosed?
I actually just talked to someone yesterday that was just diagnosed.
Mhm.
And the two things that I said were, training. Ask your doctor for training if you're not
Mhm.
getting training. Make sure that you can get as much training as possible, because it will only help you. Number two, don't freak out. This is what somebody told me. They said when they were diagnosed as a child, their
Mhm.
doctor told them, "You'll still have a normal life. You'll still be able to get married and have kids if you want that. You could still go for all of your dreams if you want that. You can still do all of the things that you want to in life, and
Mhm.
you'll learn to be able to prosper and still have this autoimmune disease."
Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And anyone living with type 1 or any sort of disease that's lifelong, a chronic illness, just know that like there is hope, and you can always reach your dreams and goals and inspire others. And it's not hopeless by any means.
That's a great way to say it.
Well, Reneé, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It was so inspiring to hear what you've been through, especially in the last few years, and how type 1 hasn't stopped you at all, clearly. And I can see you doing a lot more going forward. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much for having me. And Marley, it's always great to talk to another type 1. I appreciate you sharing some of your story as well.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I love hearing others' experiences and connecting on that level. And it's really important for everyone to hear those. I would just like to thank everyone else for joining us for another Be a Friend Friday chat. We hope Reneé has also encouraged you to advocate for yourself and any others living with diabetes around you and in your communities. Please keep checking back on the American Diabetes Association social media pages for any upcoming events and more stories in the coming months. Again, Reneé, thank you so much.
Thank you.